The Future History of Energy and Transportation. Documenting the paradigm shift from the era of oil and internal combustion to the era of robotics. By Julian Cox. Narrated by the author with the aid of an artificial intelligence. Chapter 20. Of Hydrogen and Earth. Author's note: forgiveness is asked of the reader for the occasional use of emotive language patterns. No loss of objectivity should be inferred. I knew this before I wrote it, and any annoyance came afterwards, meaning between that and sharing it with you. It is possible to demonstrate conclusively to the best and the brightest minds on Earth that a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is a completely hopeless proposition. The better and brighter, the more completely and clearly this is understood. That includes the best and the brightest researching, funding and promoting them. Toyota, Hyundai and others have not discovered how to defy the very ordinary laws of physics governing this field. Hence the novel contribution required that has been hitherto missing from public discussion of this topic, is to set out clearly why this is occurring. First, to recap and to summarize what is occurring. Fuel cell efficiency does not translate well to vehicle-level efficiency, and unlike gasoline, societal-level energy efficiency, compared with the reasonably high efficiency of extracting oil from the ground, is not a redeeming factor for hydrogen in the case of hydrogen produced by the expenditure of a societal resource such as renewable electricity. The exception to this rule is covered in the section, A Story of Ice and Fire. Fuel cells suffer the central issue of internal combustion, that is, the materials used are not rechargeable. 5.085 metric tons of hydrogen is required to achieve 300,000 miles in a Toyota Mirai, as opposed to nominally 0 tons of materials net of recycling to achieve 300,000 miles using a battery. The most competitive and economical way to obtain hydrogen is as follows. CH4 plus H2O equals CO plus 3H2 followed by CO plus H2O equals CO2 plus H2. These two equations can be truncated to CH4 plus 2H2O equals CO2 plus 4H2. The corresponding molar mass equation is 16 plus 36 equals 44 plus 8. This is just the reaction referred to as steam methane reforming, or SMR, net of the fuel or electricity used to produce steam and the energy plus materials plus labor expended to get the materials and the energy to the reaction, net of compression and distribution losses. Result: for every 5.085 metric tons of hydrogen expended in driving 300,000 miles, 84.31 metric tons of carbon emissions are produced well-to-wheel, compared with 97.2 metric tons for a 27 miles per gallon BMW 328i, a much better car, or 59.6 metric tons for a more directly equivalent gasoline Prius, and this assumes methane emissions are moderate and ordinary. Methane emissions are typically underreported significantly in the case of fracking operations. Processes that produce less emissions than this to obtain hydrogen are uncompetitive and can never become competitive at scale. Meaning that this process, SMR, in any hypothetical market on anything approaching a societal scale hydrogen economy will inevitably push any alternative processes out of business, on price and feedstock abundance, leaving perhaps some crumbs on the table for chemical waste streams. Note: little to none for renewable energy curtailment, for the same reason of price competitiveness. The opportunity to derive value from electricity going to waste will inevitably be addressed by developments in smart grids that include battery storage or similar high-efficiency storage and retrieval mechanism, such as pumped hydro. The very low round-trip efficiency and high maintenance overhead of compressed hydrogen and fuel cells precludes hydrogen as a storage and retrieval mechanism for grid electricity at scale. All of the efficiency gains touted for a Toyota Mirai are either conflated with component-level efficiency or at the vehicle level. They are attributable to hybridization with a battery electric system, whereby simply removing the fuel cell architecture entirely and replacing it with additional battery capacity is the obvious optimization. Literally, to remove the source of the inefficiency the hybrid architecture is required to counteract, the hydrogen fuel cell stack and its peripherals. There is no customer demand for an FCV to solve the problem of lengthy charging times experienced by EV owners. Only a corporate demand for a solution to customers and policymakers abandoning fossil fuels for fully electric vehicles. Potential customers who place particular value on the gasoline pay at the pump experience won't buy electric vehicles until charge times are adequately reduced, until range becomes so cheap or passive charging so automated, that it no longer features as a consideration. Under no circumstances does any person acting in their own rational self-interest as an independent customer, have either an EV or an internal combustion vehicle, and wish they had paid for a fuel cell vehicle instead. This has nothing to do with the presence or absence of hydrogen charging infrastructure. It is because fuel cell vehicles have nothing to offer that is not better served at lower cost by more appropriate vehicle technology. Inherent solar, hydro and windmill-to-wheel pathways, when interrupted by the production and consumption of hydrogen, ensure the passenger mileage deliverable per kilowatt-hour will be between half and 1/4 of the mileage obtained by simply using the electricity directly, in an electric vehicle. The value of electricity and energy is only ever degraded, dramatically, by conversion to hydrogen and back conversion to electricity via a fuel cell, where round-trip conversion losses of up to 75% are real in terms of both energy and money. These losses are inherent to hydrogen and oxygen because this is a particularly poor choice of chemical pair, that strongly favors interactions with heat as opposed to electrical charge upon making and breaking H2O chemical bonds. Naturally, the allure and mysticism of hydrogen is that it produces no harmful emissions upon combination with oxygen to produce water, but of course the same is true of every single energy storage medium that exhausts no materials at all, from batteries and pumped hydro to lifting a block of granite from the ground. Besides the water party trick, the primary distinction of hydrogen as an energy store is that it is the most difficult and expensive to handle, the most expensive in terms of facilities, infrastructure, equipment maintenance and amortization, and the most lossy on a round-trip basis by far. Hydrogen in energy storage has precisely one redeeming feature: fungibility with hydrogen derived by SMR, from methane. To compare with a rechargeable battery and the storage of electrical energy, drawing numbers from the Toyota Mirai, a system containing 5 kg of compressed hydrogen totaling 165 kWh of energy potential in air, LHV, is inextricably linked to 87.5 kg of state-of-the-art composite over-wrapped pressure vessels and a fuel cell stack with internal fasteners weighing 56 kg, plus the metal pressure vessel, plus the pumps, pipes, valves, radiators and fixtures. Let's allow 150 kg to be generous, multiplied by 50% thermal to electrical efficiency to be generous too, and we arrive at a complete replacement for a single-use battery amounting to 0.5 times 165 kWh, divided by 298.5 kg, equals 0.276 kWh per kilogram, without the crash structures, battery hybridization and DC to DC converter required in a vehicle. To be clear, and here's the kicker, this system cannot store electrical energy. It can only store hydrogen? So in addition, to match the capability of a humble rechargeable battery in the handling of electricity, we must also add at a minimum, an external water purification system, an electrolysis tank that can accept electricity, a hydrogen compressor and the maintenance for all of the above. This whole Heath Robinson outputs 82.5 kWh if you feed it with 244 kWh of electricity, a ratio of 295.8 kWh in, 100 kWh out, after accounting for just electrolysis and compression losses. This is a 66% loss of the input energy in this rather generous example, or 33% round-trip efficiency. 25% round-trip efficiency would be more ordinary. A comparable commercially available rechargeable fit and forget storage battery will shed 8%, 92% round-trip efficiency including a DC to DC converter, and cost a fraction of both the upfront and maintenance expense, while still producing zero emissions, and impacting no water resource either. In all other cases, the use of hydrogen in energy exacerbates emissions due to the extreme well-to-tank carbon intensity of decarbonizing a hydrocarbon, plus the propensity for methane seepage throughout the feedstock chain. The only really valid objective of efforts to generate hydrogen without emissions would have been to tackle the excessive emissions generated by the current installed base of hydrogen production, via steam methane reforming, SMR, in the refinery business. SMR is used predominantly for hydrocracking, an oil refinery process to break down long-chain hydrocarbons such as tars and waxes to yield lighter fractions such as octane that are useful in liquid fuels, and to a secondary and tertiary degree for fertilizers and semiconductor manufacturing. This incidentally is the thread that ties together the seemingly unrelated companies of Koch Industries, with its provenance of thermocracking. Hydrocracking is an iteration on the theme of Fred Koch's disruptive refinery technology. Besides dealing with the extraordinary GHG emissions associated with the production of hydrogen via SMR and similar, including steam reforming of naphtha, butane and so on, and the gasification of coal, there is no validly non-nefarious case for even discussing hydrogen in energy. None whatsoever in connection to the terms clean, green, or greenhouse gas reduction. In this regard, the fantasy of energy from water is purely a public relations attack vector for use by cynical fossil fuel and hydrocarbon interests. As too are the small-scale biomass, wind and solar demonstrations and research projects that seek to achieve the public and policy misperception that these have any path to scale other than the one envisaged by their sponsors, frequently, Shell, Toyota, the industrial gas and fracking industry generally, as well as the taxpayer, courtesy of officials who have succumbed to their lobbyists. That path being SMR of methane feedstocks. From an engineering standpoint, fuel cell vehicle systems architecture borders on an insult to the intelligence. The absence of either an exhaust pipe or sufficient mass flow to vent heat mandates large radiators to dissipate 40 to 60% of the input energy, owing to a strict requirement to keep a PEM, proton exchange membrane, fuel cell below the boiling point of water, at whatever pressure is considered safe, some midpoint between having to build the fuel cell case like an engine block and the melting point of proton exchange membrane materials. The radiators defeat aerodynamic design, hence the macabre baleen whale look of the Toyota Mirai, from a country that already has image issues with scientific whaling, and the temperature, pressure and mass constraints combine to defeat thermodynamic efficiency. Large and heavy tanks are required to store hydrogen at extreme pressures, wherein the attempt to achieve acceptable energy density from an extraordinarily non-dense material at ordinary pressures, hydrogen, costs energy in compression and ultimately serves to defeat it. 87.5 kilograms of tanks plus the crash structures to protect them are required to store 5 kilograms of compressed hydrogen on board a Toyota Mirai. Currently in the Mirai, a large DC to DC converter is required in series with the inverter because the fuel cell stack voltage is not high enough to drive the inverter and motor directly. This is on account of competing demands for high surface area of an individual fuel cell wafer driven by power density, competing with volumetric efficiency constraints and a series voltage constraint, because the voltage per cell is only 1.23 volts per cell. As previously mentioned, hydrogen and oxygen are an inherently poor choice for electrochemistry. By comparison, developments are pushing lithium rechargeable cells past nominally 4 to 4.5 volts per cell with immediate commercial viability and approaching 5.5 volts in the lab. The difference between 4 volts and 5.5 volts is greater than the entire capability of a fuel cell range extender at potentially no added mass or cost in the case of a battery. More than likely a net saving per kilowatt hour versus the 4.0 volts predecessor. The traction battery in an FCV supplies all of the useful attributes of the car, namely the power density to accelerate beyond an absolute crawl and most importantly, regenerative braking. Current fuel cells cannot ramp up and down rapidly in power output to match the ordinary variable torque requirements of driving. Hence the traction battery is required to buffer the variability, relegating the fuel cell to a kind of onboard range extender that together with its periphery of support systems, weighs and costs considerably more than just adding some more cells to the battery to do away with the fuel cell range extender altogether. This is why the Mirai, despite a fully loaded tank and a fuel cell, is able to deliver 82.5 to 99 kilowatt-hours of electricity, net of 60% to 40% losses from a fully loaded 165 kilowatt-hour pair of tanks, plus a 1.6 kilowatt-hour traction battery to offer 0 to 60 times of 9.2 seconds compared with 3.1 seconds for a 405-mile range Tesla Model S with a 100 kilowatt-hour battery alone. The traction battery is even required to start the fuel cell. The power density of fuel cells is inherently problematic, generally resulting in a low power-to-weight ratio of the total system, despite the traction battery. Any improvement in public relations demonstration vehicles is entirely thanks to larger batteries, and the same can be said for FCV fuel efficiency tests, when the test vehicle is brought to the starting line with a fully charged battery, whose energy content is not actually attributable to the fuel cell. Fuel cells have relatively narrow efficiency bands, the materials are currently expensive, the system is complex to manufacture and the customer cannot charge it at home. Adding a plug and extending the battery-only range would collapse the pay-at-the-pump fueling model and accelerate the day of reckoning for the tragedy of misdirected public money to hydrogen fueling stations. Infrastructure that is destined to stand empty, even if one did not add a plug to the cars to invite a public audience to start thinking about the financial, environmental and convenience benefits of saving on the use of hydrogen. Again, every single one of these inherent shortcomings is readily and completely solved by getting rid of the fuel cell system entirely and just extending the battery to compensate. That way you get a radically better, radically cheaper and radically more efficient car with no risk of fossil fuels ever standing as a gatekeeper to operating it. Hydrogen is the fossil fuel industry's answer to the problem of competition from electrification and renewables. Not their customers' problem, and to push it as an option for global emissions reduction is a hot candidate for the most cynical and dangerous deception the world has ever known, and there have been some pretty rough ones. Global renewable hydrogen production by percentage, to a reasonable approximation, is 0%. So too is the investment in renewable hydrogen production capacity, also approximately 0%, in comparison to investments in hydrocarbon-based hydrogen capacity. The remainder is some industrial waste stream processing and a few public relations projects. Again, 95% of all hydrogen produced in the USA is currently obtained by steam methane reforming, primarily for use in hydrocracking. The remaining 5% of U.S. hydrogen production comprises steam reforming of heavier hydrocarbons. Butane is quite popular, and the gasification of coal for off-the-charts emissions. Australia produces significant quantities of hydrogen by this method and was contracted to supply the Japan 2020 Olympics accordingly, in order to assist Japan in promoting hydrogen as the salvation of the world's children from greenhouse gas emissions. Saudi Arabia has completed the world's largest fossil fuel reactor for the production of hydrogen from naphtha in a project contracted to Air Liquide. Malaysia has been approached by Japan to reform palm oil to hydrogen, and Japan and Saudi Arabia have proudly figured out a way to transport hydrogen in oil tankers by absorbing it reversibly in toluene. This is what is happening. Next, and more importantly, why?